Benny Johnson here, and welcome to another iOS development tutorial. In today's episode, we're going to be working on the model part of our iBank application that we've been working on through the past tutorials. So we're actually going to create the model, and we're going to create our own custom class and declares all the methods that are going to be part of that class, and then we're going to create an object with our controller and actually input the data saved from these text fields here, and then the class is going to return some data for us for our labels, so we can display the pay period, the interest rate, and the total payment from those methods that we're actually calling on that class. So I know it might be a little bit confusing, but once we start and actually create the class, it'll make sense. So what we need to do is create a class, and again, it's simple. File, new file. You want to select the Objective-C class, part of the Cocoa Touch category. And in the last tutorial, we actually said subclass of UI controller. Now what we need to do today is actually subclass NSObject, right? Because NSObject is what every class inherits from in Objective-C. It gives us the allocate methods that allow us to get the amount of memory we need, and it gives us the initializer methods that allow us to prepare the memory. So every object in Objective-C inherits from NSObject. Now you may be asking, well, last time we had subclass of UI-ViewController. Well, UI-ViewController probably inherits from another object, which then inherits from another object, which might inherit from NSObject, right? At some point, that subclass and the subclass of that subclass will inherit from NSObject, right? It's part of this inheritance thing. So we're going to call our class iBankSir, and Sir stands for Simple Interest Rate. So that's what I'm going to call my class. You can call it whatever you want, but you'll have to make appropriate changes in your code. Alright, so I'm going to go next, and again I'm going to create it in our project folder. And as you can see, we've got the header file as always, and we've got the implementation over here. Now I'm going to go back to the standard editor so you can see all this. And again, we've got the import foundation, just gives us all the foundation stuff. And we've also got at interface BankSir inherits from NSObject, and this just declares the end of that class header. So we're going to add some methods here, and in the previous tutorial I talked about return. So if you can remember back to 10 plus 6, we don't just do that, it gives us back 16, right? And then we can use that to actually find out what x equals plus 4, which would be equal to 20, right? Because that bracket returns 16, so then we can go 16 plus 4 equals x and 20, because that's how we do it. Or a better example for that is if I times it by 2 and it equals 24, right? That's the return type. Remember those brackets, return the value that come from those brackets, and then we can actually do the whole equation. Now, an example of a parameter would be if I were to put 2, and then it would be 2 times 20 times 4, which would equal 80, plus 4, which would equal 84. And that's an example of a parameter. We're passing this 2 into this bracket to change the value of the numbers in that bracket. So that's an example of parameters and how they are useful in the math world. But I'm going to show you how they are useful in the programming world. So I'm going to delete all that, and we're going to add our methods. So first off, the syntax for creating methods is the dash, open bracket, and followed by the data type you're going to return. So as I said with brackets, this would return a number, right? This would return 20. So we'd put int if we were to declare a function that was like that. So we were taking an int, and you may ask, well, what if I wanted to declare a function that returned nothing? So a function that did something like change the text on a label. You wouldn't need to return anything. To do that, all you have to do is type void. And this basically means this function does not return anything. It just does something like change the text in the label, change the color of a background, etc, etc. But this time we're going to return an int, because we're going to use this with our controller and actually take the value back from these methods that come from iBankSir and place them into labels. So that's why we're going to return an int, and followed by the name. So I'm going to call it interest rate for loan, right? So this is going to return an integer that is obviously going to be the interest rate for that loan. Next, we have to declare what we're going to pass in. And if you're not going to pass in anything, you don't have to do that. You can just leave it as that, and that will be valid. But if you do want to pass in something, you have to go colon. Then you have to tell it what type you're going to pass in, and it's the same syntax as this integer return type. So we want, every time this method is called, we want an object to be passed in, and this object is going to be an NS string. And if you can remember, NS strings are just text basically. And we also have to give it a pointer, because it's an object, it's not a scalar type, it's an object. Unlike int is not an object, right? It's a scalar type. It's small, you don't need that much memory. That's why we can carry it around, we can pass it around. But NS string is like passing around a house, so that's why we just pass the address around when we're using NS string. So what this says is that we want to pass an address of an NS string, so we can then get the data from that string. We're not actually giving that method the actual house, right? We're just giving it the address. That makes sense. Don't worry if it doesn't make sense. Yeah, it shouldn't really matter at this point. I'm just putting it out there so you can understand. So then we're going to call that string that's going to be passed in amount string. So we can refer to that address as amount string, right? Now I'm going to declare 3 other methods. So the same syntax, dash int, because we're going to return an int. We're going to call it period months. So obviously this is going to return the amount of months for that loan. It's going to take a parameter of an NS string address pointer, right? And that is going to be referred to as period string in the actual function. End it with a semicolon. Next we're going to write another function. Again, it's going to return an int. It's going to be called investment return, right? And this is going to pass in a integer, right? And it's going to be invest amount. Now this function actually takes 2 parameters, right? It takes an integer and it also takes another integer. The way to declare 2 integers or 2 parameters in Objective-C is to actually put a space, then you want to say what the parameter is actually called. So I'm going to type investment period, right? I'm going to put colon int, which is the data we want to be passed in, and it's going to be referred as period in that function. So let's go through this last bit here. I'm just going to put enter there. So it's going to return an int. It's called investment return, which takes an integer that is going to be referred to as investment amount. But it also is going to take another parameter which is called invest period. It's an integer and it's going to be referred to as period. Now, this name here might confuse you because we're referring to the parameter as period in the function. This is just to name the parameter we are passing in. So investment return is the first name of our parameter. Investment period is the second name of a parameter. Right? So these two functions here are actually for our loan part, and these another function that I'm going to write here just now, which is going to take and return an integer. It's going to be invest interest amount, and it's going to return an integer which is going to be referred to as invest amount. And it's going to be called invest period for another parameter colon int period. Right? So what these two methods here are actually for our loan controller, and these two other methods here are for our investment controller. Right? Well, that's about it. We finished our header file for our actual bank simple interest class. So I hope you enjoyed that tutorial, and I'll see you guys later.